Hello my peeps and welcome to another one of my videos. Today we're going to be doing something different. I'm going to be doing a react video to mossbags, the biggest mysteries left in Hollow Knight. Well, first things first, you should go to his channel and watch this video on his channel, okay? Make sure to do that. Also make sure to subscribe to his Patreon because, he deserves it. He does a really good job with, explaining the lore of Hollow Knight and so far. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Yeah, got my
Despite this
ready.
channel running for over 5 years now, and having over 3 whole videos dedicated to Hollow Knight lore, there are still quite a few mysteries left lurking in the ruins of Hallownest. This video will serve as a rundown of all the weird aspects of Hollow Knight lore we have yet to fully piece together. We're going to be hitting on a few topics I've already covered in previous videos, but there are also a few mysteries I haven't really touched on before. Also, some of these mysteries do have pretty reasonable explanations that maybe aren't as well known in the community. And before we get started proper, I did want to mention the Lore Archives, which is a document full of interesting lore write-ups written by various members of the Hollow Knight community. So if you want to check out theories from the community on a variety of different topics, try checking it out. I put a link down in the description. I also put a link to the entire script of the B movie as well, so be sure to check that out too. The first big question I think we all ask at one point are,
those people do a really good job at explaining the lore in Hollow Knight, because it's so big and it's so vague. I would have never understood anything about this game if it wasn't for mossbag and all those people who piece together everything, because as with almost everyone, I imagine, I also had to, when I finished the game the first time, I also had to go online and search for answers because, it's so big. So the job they do cannot be overstated of how good a job they do.
another is, what's outside Hallownest? There are 2 instances where the game tempts us with glimpses of the outside world, but we are stopped by powerful forces of nature. Through interacting with the Godseekers, we also get very small windows into lands outside of Hallownest. We see the Godseekers in the middle of their journey through the wastelands as they make their pilgrimage to Hallownest. We also see the Land of Storms, the location from which the Godmasters fled after they were abandoned by the Gods of Thunder and the Gods of Rain. We also see parts of the Lands Beyond in the Quarrel prequel comic and in the opening cutscene of Hollow Knight's Silksong. All of these scenes portray the Lands Beyond as a desolate wasteland, filled with nothing but sand, rock, and deadly creatures. Even the tablet in the Howling Cliffs tells us that there is no world beyond Hallownest. But are the Lands Beyond truly such a desolate wasteland?
Oh, there are no worlds that they know of, I imagine, because we know that now that there are other worlds, of course. It would be unwise for Team Cherry to just back themselves into a corner and say that, oh, there are no other worlds out there. But now we know that does, yeah, but it's a pretty interesting idea, to see what is beyond the Hollow Knight, because we don't know what is there exactly.
And after all, there are several travelers who arrive in Hallownest, such as Zote, Cloth, and Tiso. And of course there's also Farloom, a completely different kingdom that exists somewhere else out there. So even if the Lands Beyond are mostly wasteland, there still appear to be pockets of civilization, although maybe not to the scale of Hallownest in most cases. But this does raise another question. Why does the lore tablet at the entrance to Hallownest call it the last and only civilization? I think this is because the Pale King expected Hallownest to last eternally, and if that were the case, then to travelers arriving in the far future, it really would be the last and only civilization. And there might actually be good reason to believe that there really aren't many kingdoms left in the world of Hollow Knight. Long before the events of the game, the Pale King existed in the world as a worm.
Well, could be also a sense of scale, because for creatures that would be the size of an ant or very small creatures, having their lair and going to another place, it must be very, very far away. Kind of like we have, like to us as human beings, going to another galaxy or going to another planet is an extremely long journey, right? It's extremely far away, so far that we could even imagine that there's only intelligent life on Earth. So for these kinds of creatures, they're so small, and the distance between one kingdom and another could be so great great that to them, basically, it means that, there are no other kingdoms. My lair is the only lair, because basically everything else is so far apart. Could be something like that.
Burrowing
sense
through
of scale.
mountains and across wastelands, and only came to Hallownest to die. From there, he shed his worm form, taking on a meager shell, founded Hallownest, and created a beacon to draw in subjects to his new kingdom. According to Dreamnail dialogue from Mr. Mushroom, this is how worms typically operate. Worms pull bugs into their thrall. Worms might be one of the primary forces that build civilizations in this world. But there's one line from Bardoon that illuminates the problem here. When discussing
Well, worms could be something like a queen of a hive. I know they're not exactly, but that's their sort of kind of their idea, I imagine. They give structure to a world. Everything that an ant or a bee does is usually for the queen, right? Is to gather things, to gather, food, forage for food for the queen, to give more birth. So the queen kind of structures the nest to do something, to be that very well structured, very well organized society. And that's what the Pale King could be here. Could be like, without the Pale King, their society is just disorganized. There's no organization. Everyone is just doing whatever they do, it just existing in the moment. When the Pale King arrives, he's like the queen ant, the queen bee, that now everyone exists in a very organized structure. They have a very specific job in order to serve the queen. So that's my opinion.
the worm's cast-off shell, Bardoon says, "With its light gone, the world is smaller." This line might imply that the worms of this world have all died out. This could explain why the land is so desolate. The creatures mainly responsible for advancing civilization are just all gone now, so most of the kingdoms have collapsed into sand. It's interesting to think of a world where worms were more prevalent, and there were tons of nearby kingdoms engaging in trade and warfare. Of course, while this might explain the current state of the world, it raises another question. Why did all the worms die out in the first place? Did they destroy the natural ecosystem of the world by their actions, leading their population to drop? And why did the Pale King die specifically in Hallownest? Is there something unique about this patch of Earth that draws the likes of the Pale King and other civilizations to try and claim all of it? These are some pretty broad questions that I'm not sure we'll ever get clear answers to. And the Pale King is...
Well, it could be selective pressure as well, like we have in the real world, right? Like, for example, in the time of dinosaurs, I think all the animals were very big because there was a lot of oxygen. Maybe I'm mixing the timelines, but it's something like that. And when you have too much of something, too many animals of the same species or whatever, because it tends to go like this. They tend to get extinct. They tend to stop disappearing, and only a few starts to survive because of selective pressure. That could be one of the reasons for this.
Isn't the only worm we know about. The black worm is mentioned in the Hunter's journal entry for the Dung Defender, where he mentions that he participated in the Battle of the Black Worm. And that's all we have on the black worm. This pitiful amount of information has led to a wide variety of theories, and I think it might be worth discussing a few of them here. One of the most popular theories out there is that the black worm is the corpse that houses the Colosseum of Fools. In my dedicated Colosseum of Fools video, I dismiss this idea pretty strongly. But since anything related to the black worm is speculation, let's lay out the evidence. First of all, this ancient bug corpse is very unique from every other ancient corpse we see in Hallownest. It appears to have chains going into it, as if someone was trying to immobilize it. Perhaps because this creature was encroaching into Hallownest during the Pale King's reign. This could signify a battle. Second, the Lord Fool might be like the Pale King in that it was born from the carcass of the larger Colosseum bug. The name Lord Fool might have even been part of his punishment for trying to invade the Pale King's kingdom, and he's been relegated to stay inside his cast-off shell on the edge of the kingdom.
Could be. I think that's a good way of looking at things. Like I said, selective pressure. They're disputing territory, resources, or whatever, and the Pale King just was superior in that, and he perished. And that if you up the ante of the scaling, that's what you get.
Third, the worship of the Lord Fool we see from bugs like the Little Fool might be part of the worms pull bugs into their thrall line from Mr. Mushroom we discussed earlier. This might also explain why the Colosseum houses infected bugs that seemingly still retain their ability to act non-hostile towards the knight. The hurdles this theory has is the fact that this corpse looks nothing like the cast-off shell. It has limbs, it isn't molting, the interiors look different. There's also Elena, who identifies the cast-off shell as a worm, but not the Colosseum of Fools corpse. In order for this theory to work, you have to argue that the pale worm isn't representative of all worm types, which I think does have merit, but I think the Colosseum worm idea strays a little bit too far. The other argument I've been seeing pop up is that the black worm isn't a worm at all. This stems from the lack of consistency between its name and every other instance of the word worm we see in the game. Anytime the word worm is used outside of black worm, the word is by itself. Most instances of the word just say worm by itself with a capital W, with a few instances where it's just in lowercase. There's also the one time Grimm uses the word worm with an O, seemingly to mock the Pale King. The only other time, aside from blackworm, where we get an adjective in front of the word is when it's written as pale worm. 2 words, both capitalized, as opposed to just one word. Personally, I don't find this line of thought to be very compelling either, mainly because if it's not a worm, what is it? Generally, the theory follows that the black worm was some kind of location, perhaps a place with a structure that looked like a worm or something to that effect, or maybe it's named after a battle tactic, like the Battle of the Bulge. While this might alleviate the discrepancy between pale worm and black worm, I don't think it's a very sound idea on the whole. The only other idea I can think of is that the black worm is a different worm with its own kingdom that possibly fought against the Pale King at some point in the past. It seems like if any higher being could form a militia to do something like that, it would be a worm. So yeah, that's my take on those 4 words of lore.
Yeah, could be anything. Could be something big, could be something small, could refer to another worm, or just be a location, or just a proper name. Who knows? That's the thing with this game. Team Cherry just throws a lot of names and whatever inside the game that we never know, and probably they don't even know either, you know? We're the ones who overthink, and Team Cherry is on, wait, we had something like battle worms? What is that?
Void is a very complex subject in Hollow Knight. So much so that there is a 70-page lore document written by someone in Toxic Brain detailing all the different aspects of Void and its impact on the lore.
That's a book. They can just, release it as a PDF, get a publisher, and release it, you know?
But in this section, I'm going to discuss something only briefly mentioned in this document and never mentioned on this channel before. While Soul and Essence have clear sources.
Actually, that's a pretty good idea if you think about it, having a book about Hollow Knight, that is approved officially by Team Cherry. It sold all the lore, all the story, the characters and everything, like a big encyclopedia or whatever, because that would be pretty cool, actually.
Sources from which they are created, we have no clue how Void is formed. Void is always described as a darkness or an emptiness, which aren't really things that can be created, but instead are an absence of something else. However, there is one comparison that could explain where Void comes from: regrets. When dying and losing its shade in Hollow Knight, the knight can recover it by giving a rancid egg to Confessor Gigi in Dirtmouth. Gigi describes the missing shade as a regret, which leaves a dark stain on the world. And after the knight collects the Void Heart, Gigi even describes the knight as coming to terms with its own regrets. But it's not just the knight's regrets that Gigi speaks about. Gigi notes that the entire kingdom of Hallownest has become thick with the stains of regret. It's possible that Gigi is aware of the other shades trapped in the abyss, but the fact that she says the entire kingdom is stained might mean that she can sense the regrets of all the bugs that have died since Hallownest collapsed. This idea that normal bugs can also leave stains of regret is reiterated by the Hunter. In the journal entry for the shade, the Hunter remarks, "Each of us leaves an imprint of something when we die, a stain on the world. I don't know how much longer the kingdom can bear the weight of so many past lives." This regret motif appears one more time, scribbled on the tablet located just outside of the abyss. The tablet describes the abyss and the discarded vessels as the refuse and regret of the Hollow Knight's creation. So there are quite a few connections between Void and regrets. But the problem with this theory is that we don't really see non-Void creatures actually create Void. There are occasional bugs that have black streaks under their eyes, such as Grey Mourner's dead lover, the Lord Fool, No Eyes, Maskmaker, and Karina, but there really isn't any slam dunk connections here. For the Mantis, those could be tears. For No Eyes, blood. For Lord Fool, it could be weathering, like what we see on statues and paintings that have eyes. And as for Maskmaker and Karina, there really isn't any indication that either of these two characters have any regrets. But I think there is at least one plausible example of a non-void creature leaving a dark stain on the world. The Pale King. The entirety of the White Palace hidden in the Dream Realm still shines with that bright, pale light, with the only two exceptions being the White Palace Workshop and the Pale King's throne room. From the dialogue of his royal retainers, as well as Maskmaker, we know that the Pale King was racked with shame and deeply troubled. Ultimately, the Pale King faded away, alone on his throne, and the deep regrets he held inside stained the throne room, shrouding it in a thick cloud of void. While I think this makes a lot of sense thematically, it might be a little too much of a stretch to say void originates entirely from regrets, especially since the way void is used in the rest of the game doesn't reflect this idea. Team Cherry might have just used the regrets concept as a way to keep the concept of void a mystery, since the player could potentially meet Gigi very early on in the game, but it's the best explanation I have for the void's origin. The only other idea I can think of is that void is supposed to be like some kind of oil deposit, perhaps from the dead bodies of centuries past. But the complete lack of the United States military anywhere in Hallownest kinda makes this theory unlikely.
So far. But yeah, Void is very vague, as with almost everything else in this game. The idea that those monsters with those bugs with the streaks, the black streaks, are Void is something completely that people just arrive at that conclusion by themselves, you know? Like, it's not that it's confirmed, actually, that that is what it is. The same thing with the Pale King in the room. Or is the Void is a sentient being? Is the Void like a mass of sentience or something like that? Like a collective mass of things, of sentient beings or something like that gives it sentient, at least. We don't know. We have no idea, and it's one of the most interesting parts of Hollow Knight, at least for me, is the void, and I hope we can see more of it in Silksong.
Maskmaker is such a fun little character. They seem so oddly separated from the rest of Hollow Knight lore, and yet they have intimate knowledge about the events of Hallownest, and even civilizations from long before the Pale King. Some of the Maskmaker's dialogue can be interpreted in regards to the Knight. They talk about the contrast between the Knight's outer shell and its inner shade, almost as if the Knight itself is a face hidden behind a mask. But this doesn't really answer the question of why the Maskmaker is making masks in the first place. Who are the Kingdom's Faceless the Maskmaker is referring to? Why do they seemingly equate having a face with the ability to define, focus, and exist? And why do they consider masks a gift to a world deserving? The problem with
It could be something like we're seeing clothes for human beings. Maybe it's not as much as like, without masks, you're not going to be able to be yourself. You're going to lose your mind. You're going to lose your sanity. Maybe it's an idea of personality, of individuality. Masks for them are the same thing as clothes for us. And we externalize the things that we like, our personality, through our clothing, right? That's what we do. So that might be why he makes masks, because every mask gives a distinct look, a distinct personality to each bug, and that's why he does.
Answering this question is that we see very few characters in Hollow Knight that actually wear masks, and sometimes those masks seem to serve different functions. There's the Three Dreamers, Quarrel, the Fools in the Colosseum, the Grim Troop, the Godseekers, and possibly Midwife. But outside of that, we've got very little to work with. So it's hard to define who the Kingdom's Faceless are and how exactly masks affect their wearers. I have my own idea about what all this means. It does involve a lot of assumptions, and it has its fair share of issues, but I'm not really sure if there's any theory I like more. I mentioned before that the Maskmaker draws a contrast between the Knight's outer shell and inner shade. I think there's a parallel theme here in the actual bugs of Hallownest. I think some bugs are naturally more beastly in nature and aren't capable of higher thought. These would be the Faceless that Maskmaker refers to. However, these bugs can still conceal their true nature using masks, and somehow, masks are able to grant these bugs identity and allow them to exist as more than just weak-minded beasts. In effect, this is the same as the Pale King's Beacon. However, while in Hallownest, these bugs no longer need to hide their true forms, as explained in one of the lore tablets located in the King's Pass. In a time before the Pale King's Beacon, masks were potentially a much more useful object, which could explain why we see ancient masks lying around the kingdom. Perhaps the mask maker was making masks long before the Pale King arrived, and chose to continue making masks because that's all they knew how to do. Their swirling eyes might imply that they are a little insane, driven to feverishly make masks for the people of a dead kingdom. So to simplify things, the Pale King's Beacon redeems the beastly, base instinct of bugs. However, bugs could also wear masks that conceal their beastly nature and in turn, grant them an identity. Both are methods that turn the faceless into sentient beings. How likely is this theory correct? I'm not sure. It's still really weird that Mask Maker is making masks for Hallownest when Hallownest strictly doesn't need them. It's also possible that I'm misinterpreting the King's Pass tablet completely, or drawing a connection between that and Mask Maker that wasn't intended. And again, we don't really see how masks grant identity like all this implies. Like I said, this theory is still my preferred interpretation, but I'm not going to act like it's an airtight explanation for the Mask Maker's dialogue. I really do think we just lack information to pin down exactly what this maniac is on about.
Yeah, that's true. Whatever we think of, we're gonna have to make assumptions. I made a lot of assumptions. He made a lot of assumptions. That's just the way it is when you don't have a lot of information. Because again, it's on purpose by Team Cherry, right? It could be, of course, that the masks, they are able to hide your bestiality. But if that's the case, why would they even wear in the first place? Why would someone who is beastly would feel like they would have to hide their bestiality? Because this indicates a higher intelligence, a higher plane of thought. You know, usually people who are more ashamed or more aware of their surroundings and of their own personality are people who have higher sanction, right? So you would imagine that this is the bugs that do that would be already intelligent enough to be able to do that kind of introspection. But no, but if they're beastly, then why would they even bother doing it? But parts that he wouldn't feel the need to do it. You know, they wouldn't feel the need to hide their bestiality because they are bestials, you know.
Charms are ubiquitous in Hallownest, popping up in all sorts of random locations. And charms can be created from a variety of different circumstances. Charms can be crafted by bugs, like the Soul Catcher and Mark of Pride, born out of strong emotions like the Grubberfly's Elegy and the Spell Twister, or even naturally created, like Sporeshroom and Deep Focus. But charms can also form in another, more morbid way. Slurba tells us that charms can be created from the last wish of dying bugs. Charms that likely fit into this category include Dashmaster, Fury of the Fallen, and the Glowing Womb charm. But the biggest actual mystery surrounding charms is how they work. They are created through various random and tragic events, yet they all can slot into these vague, weird, generic notches. The best canonical explanation of anything related to how charms are equipped comes from the Wanderer's Journal, which mentions that equipping and unequipping charms can be tricky, so you have to be sitting down to do it. Thanks to officially licensed Hollow Knight vinyl records released by Fangamer, we can actually see that charms have these interfaces on their backsides and allow them to slot into charm notches. But even though these slots are discrete, with each charm connecting to just one slot, a charm like King Soul still requires 5 charm notches to actually equip. It doesn't really make sense, and even Team Cherry has thrown up their hands on this one. In an interview with Edge magazine, Ari Gibson explains that charms, quote, had this vague sense of socketing into the knight's shell in some sort of creepy way. He makes it sound like this is some sort of cyberpunk body augmentation. Now, I haven't played Cyberpunk 2077, although I have watched its anime adaptation, Cyberpunk Edgerunners.
Yeah, it's very tough for any dev to actually try to explain everything that is video gamey inside the games, right? The notches are very clearly something that was made for gameplay purposes. It wasn't made for story, for lore. In my opinion, there's not even a reason for them to do it. I kind of like it, how they kind of do it, but it's a two-edged sword, because if you go out of your way to try to explain something like notches and charms, which are for clearly, obviously, for gameplay only, it has nothing to do with like story or so far, like, or it doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of what Hollow Knight is and the lore and everything else. It starts to sound silly, like the whole notches and that would have a notch, and that they, like it just sounds silly. It sounds like that it doesn't belong in this game, you know. So maybe, I don't know, it's just my opinion, but maybe they could have just not given any kind of explanation. Say no, there's no explanation. It's just a video gamey thing. Take for what it is. And also the cyberpunk thing is actually kind of my interest as well. I have no interest in playing the game, but I would much likely watch the anime. I've been interested in watching the anime, but not play the game.
Everyone in the Hollow Knight community generally agrees that grubs are hideous creatures that deserve to be mashed up into a fine, viscous paste. But one thing the community isn't quite as sure on is most of the lore surrounding the grubs and the reason behind their capture. Why are all these grubs trapped in jars? I hear you moan. High up in the Watcher's Spire, just below where the dreamer Lurien the Watcher sleeps eternal, we can find a couple of unassuming lore tablets. However, upon further inspection, we can see that these tablets actually contain images of jars, similar to the ones found scattered throughout Hallownest. The same jars containing dozens of helpless grubs. We can find a stockpile of these jars east of Lurien's tower, in a location called the Tower of Love. The original resident of the Tower of Love can seemingly be found in the Queen's Garden, clutching the only key that can unlock the tower's door. When dream-nailed, this husk dandy says, "Too long spent together. We become as one." In addition to this, we can also see void seeping out of their corpse. The source of this void becomes clear when the knight unlocks the door to the Tower of Love. Inside, the knight finds a maniacal void being, known as the Collector, who is likely the one responsible for capturing grubs in jars. From its Dreamnail dialogue, we can tell that the Collector is obsessed with protection, and providing a safe space for its captives. So much so that the Hall of Gods describes it as a god of protection.
Wow.
Finally, hidden in a secret room of the Tower of Love, is a strange diagram of a grub, drawn in the style of the Vitruvian Man. Now that we've laid out all the facts of the matter, let's dive into heavy speculation. It seems Lurien tasked the husk dandy found in the Queen's Gardens with preserving the various wildlife of Hallownest. This might have been in an effort to preserve these animals from the Radiance's infection, sort of like Noah's Ark from the Bible. Or maybe Lurien just wanted there to be a collection of these bugs somewhere within the city, sort of like a zoo, like the one depicted in the 2011 hit comedy film, We Bought a Zoo. Somehow, the Collector came into the possession of the husk dandy. The Collector itself appears to be created from a mold found in the White Palace workshop, the same mold used to create the Pale King's King's molds. This implies that the Collector is some kind of defective King's mold, leading to speculation that the Collector somehow escaped from the White Palace and was later found by the husk dandy. While it's not impossible, I have a slightly different explanation. We know that King's molds likely roamed areas outside of the White Palace, given that the nailsmith can be seen making a little King's mold doll. Perhaps it wasn't uncommon to see King's molds walking around the streets of the city, so it's possible that the husk dandy was able to secure a King's mold of their own, either through Lurien as part of the preservation effort, or just through the connections they had with Hallownest's high society. But I think there was one problem with this whole setup, that being that this little husk dandy was a total freak. I think this husk dandy was the one who originally drew the Vitruvian grub, due to some sort of strange obsession with the grub's body and physiology. But I think this fascination also extended to other creatures as well. Perhaps the husk dandy was also curious to see what their King's mold servant looked like underneath all its heavy armor. Maybe they decided to completely strip it down so they could observe this strange creature in its natural form. Regardless of how the husk dandy ended up living with a naked King's mold, this set the stage for the two to become as one. with Void seeping into the Husk Dandy's body, and the Husk Dandy's fascination and obsession with preserving bugs, and especially grubs, seeping into the Collector. These strange thoughts warped within the Collector's mind, transforming it into the least insane Tumblr user you've ever seen. In the end, the dying Husk decided to lock the Collector inside the Tower of Love, fleeing to their final resting place in the Queen's Gardens. Connecting all this back to grubs, it's hard to tell if this obsession with grubs was really warranted at all. Is there really anything greater to them? While it isn't much, we do have a little bit to go on here. Note that the symbol placed on the chest of the Vitruvian grub lines up pretty closely with this gem on the Grubberfly's Elegy charm. The Grubberfly's Elegy shows what the next stage of life looks like for a grub, and the charm itself can imbue the knight's nail with a holy strength. So perhaps the original bug was obsessed with some sort of hidden holy strength contained within grubs.
This is pretty good. I didn't know most of those things. I think even by watching his other videos, I never saw any of those other viewpoints about the grubs. The grubs is, again, like the charms, video gamey, you know, like it's there to feel a purpose of be a collectathon and get a reward for it. I think they allow for more leeway for explanation in lore in game, and that's what Team Cherry kind of alluded here. But yeah, I kind of agree. I don't have much to deviate from that. I think that it's pretty interesting because I've always thought that the Collector was the one who actually was obsessed with grubs, and he is, or she, I don't know, it. But it was Dandy who actually was the one who, which makes sense. Maybe they wanted some sort of strength, which is true, again, you know, it makes complete sense. Both the two charms that are based on the grubs are very good, and they relate to vigor. Like, one is when you get hit, your soul increases, right? The other one is you get extra powerful when you are at full health. The charms are very much linked to this idea of strong vigor, strong spirit. So it could be even a way to maybe try to fend off the infection. We don't know like how much time passed between the infection start to spread and then he died from overexposition to the void. But it could be, you know, it could be anything. But yeah, I think I pretty much agree with this explanation that, you know, it was a king's mode. It makes sense. Now, how it was acquired, it could be different. I think that was the weakest link there. How it was acquired, how it ended up there. But so far, I think, yes, it's a pretty good explanation, something that I never actually thought before.
This mystery is pretty important to the core story of Hollow Knight, and it can actually be pretty confusing for new players. How exactly did the Knight and other vessels escape the Abyss? Team Cherry was even asked about this question, to which William replied, "We're not sure. We know that some of his siblings managed to make it out of the Abyss, but most of them did not. Whether those who made it out were just somehow different, or whether some of them were just lucky, that might be something we examine later." But is William actually telling the truth here? Surely they have an answer to this question. Hollow Knight lore kind of completely breaks if they don't. Since Team Cherry is not going to answer this question, I will share one theory that has been floating around for a while. Basically, there's a portion of Deepness that does seem to be affected by the influence of the Void, and not far from there is Nosk's lair. And this is the one location of the game outside of the Abyss where we see the most vessel bodies. This seems to imply that there might have been a path out of the Abyss through Deepness. Another question that might arise from this is why the Knight left Hallownest in the first place. We're given no explanation for this, and it may be as simple as vessels just kinda wander around like that. And although we don't know why the Knight left Hallownest, we do know that the Knight was called back to Hallownest by something. It's not confirmed what this was, but it seems to be related to when the Hollow Knight shell cracked in the cutscene shown at the beginning of the game. We also know that the Knight is just one of multiple vessels wandering around during this time, as Hornet is actively hunting vessels down and destroying them to keep them from trying to free the Hollow Knight. So I wouldn't be surprised to learn if other vessels also happen to have left Hallownest.
It's a good one. I find it pretty funny that mossbag and the community is trying to know something that the developers themselves said that they don't know. And even if they arrive at an answer, if the devs don't elaborate, it's not canon, right? So, yeah, But it makes sense because it could be that Nosk was searching for these vessels in every place. You know, that the Nosk itself is able to travel throughout the map, throughout Hollow Nest, and hunt for prey. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It does give credence to the idea that they were able to escape through Deep Nest, which makes sense since they are in the Abyss. The Abyss is the ancient basin, and then Deep Nest are located very thoroughly. But again, it doesn't mean that they only escaped through there. Maybe most of them escaped through there, but others also escaped from other places. And that's why the knight was outside of Hallownest and then had to come back. Who knows? I think that it just happened. He says, like Mossbag says, there could be like more of them that went outside, especially because places like Deep Nest is again very deep. They're very adjacent to the core of the whole nest. So to go outside, to find a place inside Deep Nest that goes outside of the Hollow Nest, it's not that far-fetched, I imagine. Maybe a secret place, I don't know. Who knows,
Lifeblood is a topic I have barely talked about on this channel, and that's because Lifeblood barely has any influence over the overall lore of Hollow Knight. But we should take a little bit of time to talk about Lifeblood because Lifeblood is pretty weird. Throughout Hallownest, the knight can find 8 separate lifeblood cocoons. Destroying these cocoons releases these small creatures called life seeds, which are filled with lifeblood. Not far off from these cocoons are butterfly-shaped flowers. And there are also 3 lifeblood-related charms the knight can find. The lifeblood core and the lifeblood heart are both objects that can seep or bleed lifeblood, while Joni's blessing actually transfigures the
vital fluids
of its wearer with lifeblood. Lifeblood is described as making the user feel much healthier, but despite this, Salubra tells us that drinking lifeblood is a taboo, and the blue child Joni, the character in possession of Joni's blessing, is described as being a heretic. We don't know for sure why lifeblood is considered such a taboo, but we can figure a few things. In Joni's repose, where we find her corpse, we can see an explosion of lifeblood butterflies and vines covering the cavern, all seeming to radiate from Joni's corpse. Given her charm, it seems like Joni's
vital fluids
had been completely replaced with lifeblood, and upon her death, this lifeblood sprouted out from her. From there, these butterflies and vines can then travel out and create more lifeblood cocoons for more bugs to drink from. It seems lifeblood's powerful healing properties are meant to entice a host to consume it. According to the Wanderer's Journal, lifeblood vines are capable of producing fruit, which, in real-life lore, have evolved to be eaten by animals as a way to spread their seeds. And upon that host's death, this lifeblood can then spread itself out even further. In fact, there might already be a vast network of lifeblood vegetation spreading all across Hallownest. And I should note that Joni isn't the only lifeblood-infused creature that we see. Deep under Hallownest, hidden away in the Abyss, is a door that can only be unlocked by having enough lifeblood masks. Behind this door is a strange region that seems to exist both in the real world and the dream realm, where we can see a giant creature with glowing blue eyes lurking in the background. This creature can also be seen hiding in the lifeblood room in Godhome. This being is referred to as the Abyss creature in the game files, and it clearly has some connection to lifeblood. I think it's pretty safe to assume that the Abyss creature facilitates the appearance of lifeblood in Godhome, but I'm not entirely convinced that this is the true source of all lifeblood. It might be possible that this creature is similar to Joni in that it just ingested lifeblood to the point where its
vital fluids
were completely replaced, and it can now spread lifeblood around through the dream realm. But with how little info we are given on lifeblood, we can't say anything too conclusive here.
Well, it could be that lifeblood is like blood. If we think about like from a human perspective, it is absolutely taboo to drink another person's blood, or even something that might be adjacent to it, I would say. Even if you take another person's blood and you mix it and you do a bunch of stuff, put some sugar to make it pretty tasty and whatever, it's gonna be frowned upon if you do something like that. Unless it's completely transformed into something else. But that's not the case for the lifeblood. It's still liquid. It's transformed, but it's still pretty much a liquid. So it could be just blood. Could be like a modified blood that others can drink, but they shouldn't drink because it comes from another bug, and that is cannibalism, or could be considered as such, and therefore it's a taboo. So that could be the thing. It could be that there's a physiological effect if you drink that kind of blood, but I don't think that that's the case, to be honest. So yeah, it could be anything.
Out of all the Pale King's 5 great knights, Isma is easily the most mysterious. We probably still know more about her than we do Drya, but nobody cares about Drya, and all my homies hate Drya. Getting back to Isma, we know that she was a kind person, and that her and the Dung Defender had a very close relationship. You can even hear Dung Defender say Isma's name in his sleep.
Isma.
But we only catch small glimpses of what she looked like during Hallownest's prime, and her corpse in the royal waterways seems to have somehow fused with the plant life around her. We know that this location, known as Isma's Grove, is being protected by the Dung Defender, and if we look at the Dung Defender's dialogue after consuming Isma's tear, he seems to think that Isma is still alive. And this might be true, in a sense. Looking at her corpse, it seems as though Isma is the source of all the plant life around her, almost like her body is a seed that has taken up root in the ground. This might indicate that Isma didn't die, but instead has transitioned into the next stage of her life. And it's likely that the Dung Defender is aware of this. The sign he makes outside her grove specifically mentions that it is a grove. If Isma is the source of all the plant life around her, then Dung Defender must have seen her in this state. Strangely, Dung Defender mentions that Isma willfully gave the knight her blessing, which is a little odd considering the blessing in question was Isma's tear, and it doesn't seem like Isma created it specifically for the knight. The knight kind of just walked up and consumed it. It seems like the tear was just a fruit growing out of her body, perhaps representing her immense sadness in losing her time with Dung Defender. Did Isma really grow this just for us? It's possible, but maybe Dung Defender is just in denial about Isma's true state. Or maybe deep down Dung Defender knows that she is gone, which could explain why he ponders if the line of Hallownest's great knights is going to end with him. Regardless, it does seem like Isma could still be alive, even if it's not in quite the same way you or I are alive.
I actually never thought about that way about Isma, you know, like that she could be alive. I always thought that she was absolutely dead, you know, and he and Dung Defender knew about it. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, she's kind of a plant or related to a plant, you know, so, and plants are not the type of creatures that is like an animal, you know. In order for her to actually be alive, but now as a non-sentient being, just a mass of seeds and plants and whatever makes it, you know, become this abstract being like a plant. Because, you know, when you look at a tree, there's no single part of the tree that you think, oh, this is alive and this isn't. The entire tree is alive, right? The barks and all the leaves and whatever, you know, we regard a tree as being entirely alive. There's no part of it that is not alive that we don't think as not being from the tree. But, and that could be the case, could be that now she's alive, but in a very more abstract way, you know, kind of like a tree.
Here's an interesting question that doesn't get asked a lot. Why is Hornet named Hornet? It's a little bit odd considering Hornet is a spider, and spiders and hornets are not the same animal last time I checked. Hornet has had her name since her reveal back in December.
Well, one of the ideas is that I think she was cared for, or the people at the hive had something to do with her. I think they trained her or something like that, so they could have given her the name. It could be a nickname only. It could be just she has another name, but you know, she's called Hornet. That's her nickname or something like that, you know. And you know, just because she's not a bee or a hornet, it doesn't mean she can't have the name Hornet, you know.
2014. It's a cool name, but in game, there really isn't any explanation for it. There's never any interaction between Hornet and the Hive, and no one from Deep Nest even speaks to the origins of Hornet's name. If we look outside the game, Ari Gibson did give us an explanation in a Reddit AMA held back on r/gaming in August of 2017. During this AMA, a user asked the following question: was naming the bee queen Vespa, as in Hornet, intentional? And does that have to do with Hive lore? In response to this, Ari said, Vespa to Hornet was intentional. There was an old concept here that may still apply. Hornet was the child of 3 queens. One birthed, one raised, one trained. It is from this third queen that Hornet took her name. Whether that notion still applies, however, I can't confirm, though it was definitely the basis for the names. So the original concept for Hornet was that she trained with Vespa when she was young. But Ari can't confirm that this is still the case. Or can he? In an interview with the magazine A Profound Waste of Time, held back in July 2020, the question of Hornet's name came up again. Neither Pelin nor Gibson will divulge the meaning behind Hornet's name, though Gibson states it does indeed have significance, and whether that ever is revealed, I'm not sure. In this interview, it seems like Gibson states that Hornet's name does have significance, although now he doesn't want to give any details. Does this mean that the backstory is accurate, or did Ari mean that the name had significance outside of the game? Unfortunately, none of this really matters for canonically proving Hornet's origins, as Team Cherry themselves have stated that their own statements relating to Hollow Knight lore should not be considered canon.
We try not to, it's a bit boring sometimes, but we try not to give out too much information sometimes that is not in the game, because a lot of people spend a lot of time, it's really cool, like coming up with the theories based on like the info in the game, and if we start giving out info that is not explicitly in the game, then you might start like kind of contradicting people's theories and stuff, which is no fun. Yeah, it's not a nice thing to do for I think for a creator to kind of come in after the fact and start kind of like
stomping around and denying people's ideas.
Like what's in the game is what's in the game, and anything that we say kind of outside that is actually not canon.
Yeah, well, obviously any additional Hollow Knight content is canon. So anything through Godmaster or Grim Troop or Hornet,
including like the comic and stuff.
Well, yeah.
Of course, we'll sometimes use Reddit AMA answers as if they are canon, but only in a few instances, like confirming how the Hive was infected. But those are way more minor than the Daughter of 3 Queens stuff. I occasionally see people treat this origin story for Hornet as if it's true, but keep in mind that it isn't officially confirmed by any means, and the only in-game evidence we have for it is that Hornet's name is Hornet. I should also mention that according to Elena, the Hive sealed itself off completely from Hallownest, which seems to imply that they likely never even met Hornet, despite the King's Branch she guards being so close by.
That's interesting. I did not know about that interview that they did, and they said that because, again, as mossbag just showed, it goes very much against Reddit AMA, which, I mean, look, fair enough. When you go to an AMA or when you're doing some sort of interview, of official interview, you're kind of answering for the game. They're now answering as devs and not just as Ari and Will, whatever. So yeah, but it's still quite strange that they would say that and then, give answers in AMAs, but okay. So I find it to be pretty interesting and pretty cool that, when they say things outside of the game, they tell you to treat them as any other person, hey, when we talk about stuff outside the game, we are just like you guys. We don't have any kind of authority. We are just making stuff up. That's actually pretty cool, because otherwise they might say things that go against something inside the game, inside the lore, and then they would have a lot of headache to try to justify and so on and so forth. So that's a pretty smart thing, even though it again goes against it. It is contradictory to what they do in interviews where they actually answer things in a very finite way, like the final version.
Who the fuck is Dashmaster? There's literally only one statue commemorating the guy, and it's about 5 feet from a giant sewage pipe. We're told that this Dashmaster was an eccentric bug, but not much else. Also, people got really mad at me in my last video for saying this guy wasn't a reference to the character Sans from Undertale. I'll be completely honest with you, this is a little embarrassing, but I've never played Undertale. Although I have watched its anime adaptation, Cyberpunk Edgerunners, but I guess they cut Sans from that for some reason. We're given quite a good amount of detail surrounding the nature of the Pale King and the Radiance, and yet for being such an important aspect of the story, the White Lady is a bit of an enigma. We know that part of her nature is a desire to spread her seed and propagate across the land, but she decided to put bindings on herself and trap herself in a cocoon-like chamber to suppress this nature and hide herself from others. We can actually see glimpses of what the White Lady used to look like before the events of the game. From the silhouette left on the chair in the White Palace nursery room, we can see that she was once quite a bit smaller. We can also see other images of her in concept art and early footage, which might represent how she looked during Hallownest's reign. But now her roots have grown out uncontrollably, and she must do all she can to contain them. I honestly don't really have much else to say. It's just like, where did she come from? It makes sense that a worm could have slithered its way into Hallownest, but where exactly did this big tree mama come from?
Yeah, she would be an actual queen, like I was talking about, like the Pale King would also be a queen, and she would be the queen in a more traditional sense, that she's there in order to just breed. That's basically what she did. Maybe she was not there. Maybe she was a creation of the Pale King, or either she was brought there by the Pale King. Either it was a creation of him, or he brought her there somewhere else. I don't know. Her being, like her existence, is very mysterious, because if she was there for the Pale Being, what would have happened to her if she was not there? If the Pale King was not there, how would she have have given children? Is there any other person, any other bug there that could have had intercourse with her, and had children with her? Those are kind of pretty good questions to ask, because we don't know anything about her, like Mossbag said. But she was pretty cute in those earlier, when she was smaller. Why did she grow so big? Is that like something that she grows older, she goes bigger? Doesn't make much sense to me.
Let's talk about Pale Ore. Pale Ore is icy cold to the touch, and it has been confirmed by Team Cherry that it is connected to the Pale Beings, which either refers to creatures like the Pale King and the White Lady, or Redditors. But what exactly is Pale Ore, and what does it do? Let's compare how Pale Ore changes the Knight's old nail into its final form, Pure Nail. The Pure Nail has patterns running across it similar to those seen on ancient masks and soul vessels, as well as the Hollow Knight's nail as shown in the Embrace the Void endings, and the various nail attacks used by the Pure Vessel. What's interesting here is that the Pure Vessel can literally create these solid nails that have the same pattern as the Pure Nail, using nothing but soul. So perhaps Pale Ore itself contains some form of soul, itself a substance with strong connection to Pale Beings. I should point out that the Pure Nail isn't just a regular nail, forged to be stronger. More specifically, the addition of Pale Ore somehow causes the nail to reveal its true ancient form. So even if Pale Ore isn't strictly some kind of solidified concentration of soul, it certainly has some kind of magical effect on the nail itself. However, the actual location of Pale Ore throughout the game makes this soul connection a bit strained. Of the Pale Ore that aren't rewarded by random NPCs, they just kind of show up in random rocks or eggs or whatever they are, and in the Radiance's statue. The Radiance statue maybe makes some sense as some kind of offering or ritual, but these random deposits are a bit more odd. Perhaps these are remnants of Pale Beings from a time before Hallownest?
Well, I mean, maybe the Pale Ore, and that's pretty interesting, because I agree that Pale Ores are basically, it seems that they are a solidification of soul, but I think that they're more of that. They're a mixture of things, and they are not going to just occur anywhere. If a bug that has a lot of soul, let's say like this, dies, like the Pale King, he was perfect for that, right? I don't think he's just automatically gonna turn into soul. I think there has to be like a very specific situation, a very specific environment with a metal, with another kind of metal, maybe a reaction with another kind of metal. This is why most other Pale Ore were discovered and were able to be created, in places like where, in those places where there were like a big metal shape thing, round stuff. It needs to have other kinds of metal made there that can infuse with it and creates this kind of chemical reaction of some sort, that would give birth to a Pale Ore. This is my idea. I don't know.
This mystery isn't particularly big or important, but it's somewhat cryptic in the game itself. Throughout Hallownest are three Nail Master brothers named Shio, Oro, and Mato. Despite clearly being the best among the three, Shio eventually puts down his nail to become an artist, leaving Oro and Mato to carry on the craft taught to them by Nail Sage Sly. However, at some point, Oro and Mato had a falling out, and now live on opposite sides of the kingdom. Mato is awaiting something that Oro owes him, while Oro will not be delivering on this anytime soon. We are also told by Shio that Oro is haunted by something. What could this be? I hear you quiver. First off, Oro is likely the worst nail master of the trio. We have a short line from Sly where he says that Oro holds his nail like a club. Later, upon learning that the knight received Nailmaster's glory, Oro even mentions that he doesn't begrudge that the knight won Sly's approval, and even feels that he is redeemed in helping the knight along its journey. To me, this further indicates that Sly was never impressed with Oro's skill as a nailmaster. During the fight in Godhome, Oro has Dreamnail dialogue indicating that he wants to prove himself. Oro is also the only brother to have a training dummy outside his hut, perhaps indicating that he feels he lacks training. This is reflected by the Dreamnail dialogue of the dummy, which reads, "Stronger, brothers." I think this shows that Oro views his brothers as being stronger than him, and maybe even dresses the dummy as his brothers to remind him of this. Another contrast we can see between the brothers is how their huts are furnished. Mato has his hut covered in the skulls of beasts he has likely fallen, whereas Oro's hut is full of random objects from the city and fancy drapes. Oro is also the only nailmaster who charges Gio to train the knight, and he even scoffs at the idea that Mato fights for loyalty and honor. In contrast, Mato gets overly attached to the knight, as according to Shio, Mato's greatest desire is to be a teacher. This all leads to a strained relationship between Oro and Mato. Mato clearly takes pride in being trained in the nail and wants to share that with others, while Oro lacks confidence in his abilities. He instead trains alone because he wants to prove himself. He likely charges money as a way to keep distance from others and avoid building strong connections. We know that Oro hides his true feelings often, due to how he reacts to the knight giving him a flower. He acts all pissed off, but ultimately he ends up placing this flower in a vase. But what does Oro owe Mato exactly?
Is it
I think
Tsundere?
the most logical answers are that Mato either wants to duel Oro in a friendly competition, Mato wants to train Oro, or Mato wants Oro to fight alongside him. Whatever it is, Mato wants companionship. This would explain Mato's Dreamnail dialogue in the Godmaster fight, stating, "Brothers always fight together," and "Don't leave me behind." This is the only thing Mato is portrayed as wanting, and Oro is the only brother who still wields a nail. I don't think anything else would really matter to Mato, but due to his lack of confidence in his own skills, or his desire to prove himself, Oro refuses to give Mato that companionship. However, deep down Oro also seeks that companionship. He just fails to openly show it. Although Oro and Mato never make up in Hallownest, it's nice to think that they were able to share the battlefield at least once as brothers.
Wow, that was pretty much perfect. Perfect deconstruction of those brothers. I have nothing else to add. I think he was on point. I mean, it could be wrong. Again, this Furious and Mossbag is always such a good storyteller and a theorist, that you just hear him and you go out, oh, yes, obviously. But, he could be wrong. Could be nothing like that. But as he was explaining, it was just like, yes, absolutely. This makes absolutely completely sense. I've never paid too much attention to the brothers and their relationship. It was never much of my interest in the game, never really cared that much. But yeah, now that he's talking about them, and he's breaking down how they treat you, it absolutely makes sense. I would say, yeah, I am 110% subscribed to this theory of between Oro and Mato and Shio and so on.
Everyone in the Hollow Knight community generally agrees that Sly is a geo-pilled chat of a character that deserves to be remembered alongside the greatest characters in all of fiction. But one thing the community isn't so sure about is the identity of Esme, a mysterious character that is only mentioned once, and never seen in-game.
What the
The
hell is
only
Esme?
dialogue we get is from our first encounter with Sly while he's fighting off the infection, where he says, "Esme, how much deeper do we have to go?" William Pellin was
that's
asked about
true.
Esme in a Reddit AMA, and he responded that she is someone that still lingers in Sly's dreams. So, not a lot to go on here. From Sly's dialogue, it seems Esme was pushing Sly to travel into some sort of dangerous area. The only possible clue we have is the shopkeeper's key, located in the Crystal Peak, not far away from Dirtmouth. Perhaps Sly and Esme were exploring this area when they got separated somehow. When we give Sly the shopkeeper's key, he even guesses that the key was in the mines, so it's likely that Sly was in that region at some point. It's worth pointing out that a lot of characters in Hollow Knight have mysterious dead lovers. Cloth mentions a character named Nola that also died at some point. In fact, it's even implied that Cloth wanted to be killed in Hallownest so that she could be reunited with Nola in death, which is a very overlooked aspect of the character and probably one of the saddest storylines in the game outside of the main quest. Elderbug also has vague dialogue about a lost lover, whose grave he visits on occasion. This would also be incredibly sad if Elderbug was actually a good character.
He's the best character in the game, and he's not Sly, it's the Elderbug, okay? But yeah, oh man, I actually didn't know about this Esme person, it was something that it's so small in the whole scheme of things that it never stuck to my mind, that he actually talked about this Esme person. However, it could be that Esme is just an illusion of when he was, infected, because when you're infected, bugs usually get delusional, right? It might as well be that Sly was seeing things. He was starting to get so delusional that he started to see Esme, thinking that Esme is the one leading him to somewhere else, where he was not going anywhere else. He was lonely. He was inside the hut, just, imagining stuff. So it could be that. Who knows, right?
One of the biggest mysteries left in Hallownest has to be this strange trilobite statue in Deep Nest. In the game files, the art in this area is referred to as a shrine. It is protected by a seal of binding, and connected to several pipes that hold it up off the ground, with a mouth located at the bottom. Finally, we have concept art of this shrine from Ari Gibson's sketchbook. The design is basically the same, except we can see some kind of substance coming out of the mouth. This appears to be some type of fluid, or possibly even silk. Between the pipes and the mouth, I do believe that this shrine is a container for something, perhaps even some kind of creature. Just above the face of the shrine we can see what appears to be some type of crown, which could imply that this shrine houses Deep Nest's king. The King of Deep Nest is mentioned only once in the entire game, in a lore tablet located in the fungal wastes. He is described as Deep Nest's dead sire, and that he was of honored caste. They contrast this to Deep Nest's queen, Hera, who they describe as a broke-ass bitch. From this, we can assume that Deep Nest's king was some kind of powerful or important creature. But according to this tablet, the king is dead. Now, that doesn't mean the king can't still be inside this shrine. Perhaps the king passed away while in this device. Or maybe he's still alive in some sense, but the mushroom people just aren't aware of this. Regardless, if the king was placed in this thingamabob, I think it must have happened while he was still alive, given the pipes and the mouth. While this is a very big mystery, this is one that I am very confident will be expanded upon in Hollow Knight's Silksong. When asked explicitly about Deep Nest's king in a Reddit AMA, Ari Gibson replied, "Further elements of Deep Nest's past will be illuminated in future, but we can't say anything specific for now." So this means that an answer to this question should be waiting just around the corner. Right?
Right? Right? Yeah, to be honest, when I saw that, I never thought anything big of it, If I thought it was just, some sort of statue. It's pretty interesting how mossbag and everyone else just makes some sort of a big of a deal, and it is, to be honest. It's just that when I saw it, I was like, oh, cool statue. I thought it was a statue. I thought it was just part of the decoration. I didn't think any of it, but no, it seems to be something pretty big, or at least mossbag makes it to be like extremely big. It could be like the king of Deep Nest, which I didn't even remember that was a thing. Now that he's talking about it, yes, Deep Nest has a king, which I didn't know about that, or had it. It could be that he's inside that. I don't know. Could be so many things. What is safe to say is that Trilobite thing was supposed to have a much bigger role before. Maybe even the boss of the area. Maybe you would get to that area and the thing would get alive, and the tubes that are linked to it would fall, and the shell would crack, and then the monster would come out of it, and you would fight it. I am absolutely sure, like that thing, when they were designing the game, like the alpha stages of whatever whatever, the storyboarding, whatever, that creature had a much bigger role. But then they were like, yeah, no, Deep Nest is already big enough, it's confusing enough, it's gonna be hard enough, so let's not put any bosses here, you know, and whatever. I can't say what Team Cherry was thinking, but it was demoted. It was like, yeah, no, let's just give it there, you know. And thankfully, not thankfully, but hopefully, we're going to see more about that creature in the sequel, if it releases, because at this point I think it's only a figment of our imagination. Silk Song was a dream all along, just like the dreams of the bugs in Hollow Nest.
Long before the Pale King's rule, an ancient civilization existed in the land of Hallownest. There are several remnants of this civilization that can be found in-game. Large corpses in various locations throughout Hallownest might be former members of this ancient caste, although it's tough to find any direct confirmation of any of this. But they aren't the only thing we have to work with. Arcane eggs, soul totems, and potentially ancient masks and soul vessels are all evidence of this civilization's existence. These objects seem to be of no use to the bugs of the Pale King's Hallownest. The majority of Hallownest bugs likely didn't partake in the manipulation of soul, so there was no use for objects such as soul vessels and soul totems. These bugs also used stone tablets and parchment to store information instead of arcane eggs. Despite this, it's interesting to note that the Pale King did craft some soul totems within his White Palace, and these egg-shaped tablets that we see throughout the kingdom might be the Pale King's own version of arcane eggs, as Lem explains that eggs are just a great way to store information. Obviously. Although these are pretty massive eggs for just a...
I mean, chickens come out of eggs, so the things that are there are actually, they're a genetic material. They are sufficient to create life. So yeah, that's true. That's unironically true.
Few sentences. That's like storing a readme.txt file in one of these. There's also some weird patterns within the ancient civilization. Lem mentions that other scholars have speculated that arcane eggs contain some sort of will within them. Elderbug talks about how the rocks that form the roads and structures in the ancient basin seemed to have a will of their own. And then there's the Quickslash charm, which was formed by the fusion of a bunch of discarded, imperfect nails created by the ancient nailsmith. As the charm explicitly states, these nails long to be wielded. So it seems like inanimate objects from this time period are more likely to possess living traits such as wills and desires. But the most interesting relic from the ancient civilization is the Void Idol. As Lem explains, inspired or mad, those ancient bugs, they devoted their worship to no lord, no power, no strength, but to the very darkness itself. Lem doesn't give us a good explanation for why these bugs worship the Void, but if we look in the Abyss, we might be able to see direct evidence of these strange bugs interacting with the Void. In this room east of the Abyss Lighthouse, we see some sort of desk. Next to it is a strange relief in the wall, which is described as an imprint of Abyss-given form. This may be a stretch, but I think this was a place where the Void worshippers would give form to the Void, creating the Void tendrils we find in the Abyss Lake. So basically a more crude form of the molds we see in the White Palace workshop. Alternatively, the Void tendrils might have existed before the ancient civilization, and this room is where they studied the tendrils. Aside from that room, there's also the Shade Beast, who holds a bowl that pours out a never-ending stream of void, which was perhaps used in some sort of ritual. We can infer from the mask maker that this ancient civilization fell to ruin as a result of trying to lay claim to all of Hallownest. So perhaps this worship of the void stemmed from a desire to expand their lands. This obviously didn't work out for them. Perhaps they even ran into our old pal Radiance, which would explain why she calls the void her ancient enemy. The last strange structure we find in the Abyss shows a bunch of soy-jack faces screaming out above an altar. With the Dream Now dialogue, our voices will cry out again. Perhaps this was the last desperate cry of the ancient civilization as their kingdom collapsed and disappeared into obscurity. Although maybe this cry is actually true.
Ooh.
Allow me to speculate. In the Godmaster endings to the game,
Okay.
we are introduced to this strange void creature, who doesn't have a formal name, but is sometimes referred to as the Void Given Focus or the Void Entity. We don't really know what this thing is, but there is debate that it might be a more evolved or powerful version of the Knight, given how the Godseeker speaks to the Knight in Godseeker mode, and the fact that it replaces the Knight statue in the Hall of Gods. But I think this being might actually be more directly tied to the ancient civilization. In the first cutscene introducing this new character, we can see that it acts distinctly from the Knight, the Hollow Knight, and the rest of the vessels. While I think the Knight does become part of the Void Entity at the end of the game, I think this creature existed before the vessels were even created, and has been lying dormant somewhere in the abyss, only called back now by the focus given to it by the Godseeker's ritual. And it seems like the game really wants us to connect what the Godseekers did in Godhome with what the ancient civilization did with the Void in the past. Hence why we unlock Void Idol descriptions from looking at the Void Entity statue. But if the ancient civilization really worshipped a creature like this, what exactly was it that caused their kingdom to collapse? It's
Yeah, damn, that, the void thing is so mysterious, because I also agree. I think that, this is something that humans can relate to it a lot. We usually inhabit stuff, and then we solve stuff, we solve things, phenomena, physical phenomena that today might be explainable, but at that time it was. And then we worshipped those things as being gods, like the sun. People worship the sun, should be the god. People worship the moon, should be the god as well. I think the ancient Egypt or something like that. To this day, we have myths, we have legends, we have native tribes, whatever, who sees this kinds of phenomenons as being something spiritual, of a higher being, a higher meaning than what they actually are, that we know of at least. It is very understandable that the ancient bugs in Hallownest would actually inhabit the land and see the void. The void was already there. It's a phenomenon, right? And they would start worshiping it, because it's powerful. It's a powerful phenomenon, like we worship the sun and the moon, because those are things, the sun gives life, the sun burns, the sun, etc. And the same thing goes for the void. The void would do, I don't know, maybe it didn't do anything too special, but since it's so different from what they've always seen before, they would start worshiping it. They would be like, okay, this has some sort of significance, this has kind of stuff here. And then they learn how to manipulate a little bit in a very rudimentary way, to make forms, to shape forms, and to give a little bit of like a mind of not sentience per se, but to be able to exist as a being, not just as a thing anymore. As for the Shade Lord, I think the name, right? I don't know. It could be that they were a creation of the ancient bugs, that they were like, they made that Shade Lord somehow, some sort of ritual, and they were able to manipulate to create this massive being, or it was already there from the beginning and that was the sort of a god that they worshipped, although I am not sure if that's the case, to be honest. Who knows? I don't know much about the Shade Lord, so I'll go with whatever mossbag said there.
established that one power worms like the Pale King possess is foresight. And this ability is mentioned once by Bardoon and twice by the mushrooms of the fungal wastes. But as we all know, despite this prescience, the Pale King's kingdom still collapsed into ruin. But how prescient is the Pale King really? I hear you ask in a normal tone of voice. The way I like to think about this problem is in regards to time. The Pale King was specifically trying to create a kingdom that would last forever, an eternal kingdom. The Radiance is described in a lot of dialogue as being nature, or something unavoidable. This is what the dead guy points out in his Dreamnail dialogue. Nature will come to destroy the Pale King's civilization eventually, as kingdoms can't last forever. The Pale King's only solution to this is to just stop time, as explained in the White Palace Workshop lore tablet. So yes, the Pale King was able to foresee an unavoidable demise, but his solution was to delay it indefinitely. This idea of fighting your inescapable fate is a storytelling trope seen all throughout literature. The most prominent and well-known example is from the television series The Amazing World of Gumball. In the episode The Oracle, Gumball finds paintings produced by Banana Barbara that appear to predict future events, with one of them depicting Gumball completely naked surrounded by a huge crowd at the mall. In response to this, Gumball tries everything within his power to stop this from happening, but through his own actions, he inadvertently causes himself to end up completely naked surrounded by a huge crowd at the mall.
What the hell?
The same thing pretty much happened to the Pale King.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting because there are two ways that I can think of it. There is the way that mossbag is saying that, like, he never had the prescience. He's not a mind reader or anything like. He's not a oracle. It's just that his actions to try to stop the natural decay of his kingdom just leads to the decay of his kingdom. That's one way of like thinking of it. And also, there's also the fact that if you have knowledge, if you have more knowledge than someone does about something, say you are aware of eclipses, right? You know what they are, you know how they form, you know when they're going to begin, to start. And if you go to someone who doesn't know anything about eclipses, and then you talk about to them, they might think of you as an oracle because you have knowledge that they didn't have. So to them, you're previewing, you are foreseeing something. You're not foreseeing anything. You know that. It might as well be that the Pale King already had that knowledge from maybe even when he was a worm, or, you know, he was just imbued in him, you know. Maybe he didn't even learn that. It was just naturally imbued in him as a king, like natural, as it comes with him. It's like hardwired in him, the knowledge that one day his empire is gonna fall. That's just the way it is. But other bugs don't know that. To them, especially because they're not unified and they're not structured in an organized way, there's no such notion. So when the Pale King tells them the kingdom's gonna fall, they're like, oh my god, he's an oracle. But he isn't. It's just an obvious thing, a knowledge that he had but the others didn't.
Mr. Mushroom is a wandering mushroom man who somehow winds up in Hallownest. You can only understand him if you're wearing the Sporshroom charm, but even then his dialogue implies that he is talking to someone you can't see. Out of all of his dialogue like this, the only ones we are confident on are his first and third, where he seems to be talking to the main characters from two of Team Cherry's other games, Hungry Knight and Tomb Cat. But outside of what I talked about in my Mr. Mushroom lore video, there really hasn't been anything conclusive to say about the majority of Mr. Mushroom's wacky dialogue. My guess is that Mr. Mushroom is talking to characters from future Team Cherry projects, or even just ideas they have for games that they're never actually going to make. You can tell from interviews that William and Ari have tons of ideas for games that they want to make, and it's something that they think about a lot.
Game development is long, right? Especially games like this, big games. You spend 2 years on it. We thought up 10 years of games that we would love to make in 1 year of game development.
But as to specific explanations for what any of Mr. Mushroom's dialogue is referring to, he does use the word determination at one point. Now, if you're a fan of the channel, you know I absolutely love Undertale. It's an amazing game filled with all sorts of wonderful characters. In fact, I'm so good at the game, I almost beat Sans. Anyway, determination is actually a very important aspect of Undertale's main story.
I mean, come on. I don't think they were referring to Undertale at all. I mean, maybe they played Undertale, probably they did, but I wouldn't say that they based that on Undertale, to be honest. It would be cool if they did, but personally, I don't think that that's the case.
As it shows up a couple times. So I think I speak for everyone when I say this can't be a coincidence. And of course, because Mr. Mushroom is connected to all of these other Team Cherry properties in the Team Cherry cinematic universe, they have to give him a post-credit scene to tease his next adventure. The Masters are yet another group that will hopefully be expanded upon in Silksong, but as of right now, very little is known about them. They are a group of beings mentioned only by Confessor Gigi and Steel Soul Jin. When the knight receives the Void Heart, Gigi mentions that her masters would be impressed with how the knight seems to have come to terms with its regrets. Once the knight is marked with the King's brand, Steel Soul Jin mentions that she cannot bow to the knight, as her master's minds are other, and do not seek order. And once the knight receives the Void Heart, Jin also comments that the knight has become complete, like her masters. From what little we know about Silksong, it seems there are more Steel Soul creatures who are looking to assassinate Hornet. Whoever these masters are, it seems as though they are interested in void creatures like the Knight, which might explain why Gigi and Jin were assigned to offer services, while others were ordered to kill Hornet. From the dialogue we get from Gigi and Jin, it might turn out that the masters themselves are void creatures. But instead of just crazy unhinged maniacs like the Collector, or brainless golems like the King's molds, these masters are actually intelligent and capable of scheming, with their end goal in mind appearing to be not order, but something else entirely: disorder.
Makes sense. That's pretty interesting. You know, if you take what Gigi said and extrapolate, it could be that the void wants disorder. They are an unorganized type of force, which makes sense when you think about how the void is presented inside the Hollow Knight lore. You know, it's not an organization. It is barely like even the Shade Lord or others, they are united through an unorganized means, you know, so very differently from the Pale Being and Soul, which is the focus. Like, Soul is the focus, gathering something to one point and giving structure, giving organization, but not Void. The Void is completely different from that. The Void is the opposite.
The delicate flower comes from a far-off, serene land, carried by the Grain Mourner, a character who herself looks like some sort of wilted flower. Once the flower starts growing in the Queen's garden, it is described in the menu as glowing with a pale light. The White Lady recognizes it as distinct from herself and Hallownest. She mentions that a rare power exists inside these fragile petals, and refuses to accept it, telling the knight that only someone with no knowledge of its power would hold it so close. This flower can be given to the Godseeker, who ponders that it might be a splinter, cast-off, or refuse from something greater, before ultimately saying that she can't sense any godliness within it. However, if the Godseeker is holding the flower during the Embrace the Void ending, we see that the flower does something to the Void and Godseeker, seemingly leaving nothing but a small black blotch on the corner of one of the petals. There isn't any solid theory on what happens here. It might be that the Void and the Godseeker were banished to some part of the Dream Realm, similar to how the White Palace was teleported away. Or maybe they were teleported back to where the flower came from. Or maybe they're just gone. So despite being described as producing a pale light, both the White Lady denies a connection to this flower, and the Godseeker can't detect any godliness within it. If that flower shares some kind of pale property with the White Lady, Pale King, and Pale Ore, this seems to inform us that just because something is pale, doesn't mean it's godly. Is this pale property related to soul, or some other force? As of right now, I'm honestly not sure. But one thing I do know, if this flower really can just pop creatures completely out of existence, I'm glad I gave one to Elderbug.
No, the flower gave it to Elderbug is not going to do anything. It's actually only going to make him stronger. It only does that to void beings and to other beings that are bad beings. You know, the Elderbug is the best bug, so best bug does not get eaten by the flower, okay? But yeah, you know, the thing is like this. It seems that this flower is going to be featured in the next game, right? In Silksong, because I think we saw like a bed of flowers where you fight Lace or something like that, you know? But it could be from there. Like, the flower could have come from Farloom or from another place. So I don't know. I feel a little bit confident that we're going to see more of that flower in Silksong. But yeah, it's a pretty powerful flower to even engulf something like the Void, a pretty strong Void actually. It's pretty clear that it is a counter force to the Void, and it doesn't even need a lot of it, which is pretty interesting. You know, it's so strong against the Void that only a single flower was able to stop the Shade Lord from escaping, you know, which is okay. I mean,
the Godmaster update added 2 additional endings to Hollow Knight back in 2018, and unlike the base endings, which were all fairly conclusive, these 2 endings left the story on a major cliffhanger. The Knight and the rest of the siblings have seemingly been consumed into this new strange void entity. The Radiance's infection has been erased from Hallownest, and the Hollow Knight is now free from its prison inside the Black Egg Temple. And that's where the game leaves us. On top of that, we have no idea how or even if Team Cherry is going to follow up on these endings. We still don't know for sure how the events of Hollow Knight and Silksong line up on any sort of timeline. If Silksong takes place after, is the game going to give us a flashback to this event? If it takes place before, are they going to do a time skip? Or are they going to do something completely different and just explain it in a one-off comic, or another anime adaptation? In a Reddit AMA, Ari Gibson did say the following in regards to Hollow Knight's multiple base endings. All endings are equally canon. We're not into true endings. You choose the path yourself. We'll do our best in all future Hollow Knight content to account for all of them. Now keep in mind this post was made 5 years ago, before the new endings were released, so it's possible that Team Cherry changed their mind on this. That said, I don't think they have. It seems like something Team Cherry wouldn't change their minds on, and if they really do have a way to keep all this stuff canon and pay everything off, I am very excited to eventually one day have to explain it.
The problem is, this is the most interesting to me, is the endings. The endings are the most mysterious parts of Hollow Knight for me, because I know they said that they are going to make all of them canon, but I don't think that that's going to be the case, to be pretty honest. I think that they have settled on one, because otherwise it's going to be too much of a headache to have all of the other ones, to account for all of them, and make other endings, make a lot of other content just to make them. It's not satisfying, and even inside the game, we know that some of them feel more satisfying to get than others. You cannot, like, they contradict each other. If we take, for example, Silksong, which I think is a sequel, in my opinion, I think is going to be a sequel and not a prequel. If it is a sequel, then most of those endings, the ending that Hornet stays locked inside, because it's pretty much in direct contradiction with the lore. Sure, you can still explain it. Maybe the people went there and they took it out, but they're so different from each other. It makes no sense for me to have all these endings meaning so many different things. I think that they should gather one, and in my mind, I think that the canon ending is the one for the God Home, the one where Koza dies, and because that would explain a lot, especially the Silksong and how it begins. So I don't know. To me, it seems like that the God Home is the one that is like the most canon. I think that they're going to follow up from that ending. If I were to make a guess, I think that that's the ending that they're gonna. Because at least I would like to see that ending being the canon one, and see Hollow Knight again, see what he's doing, what happened. You'll have Hornet. Who knows, right? Who knows? Let's see if there's anything more.
And finally, I think it's time we talk about the single biggest mystery that has loomed over the Hollow Knight community since February 24th, 2017. It's a question that has eluded some of the greatest minds of our generation. The smartest men, women, and children have tried for years to solve this mystery, and they have all died in the process. Who the fuck is Sprintmaster?
Who the fuck is Sprintmaster? Who knows? Okay, so that's it for me. I'm done. I hope you guys liked it, my reaction, and see you next time.